Hello and welcome. This is World Talks on TVP World. I'm your host, Marie Kato. The EU has called an emergency meeting following last week's wave of 60,000 illegal migrants entering Spain's North African territory of Ceuta. Currently, 88 deaths have been reported by Spain. 22 of 27 member states have called for coordinated action and strengthening of external borders. To talk about what the EU should do next and how to avoid further tensions within the EU, let's bring in Jens Boysen, Associate Professor at Civitas University. Hello, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation.
So in April, the Spanish government announced to give legal status to 500,000 undocumented migrants, although it was expecting 1 million applicants. And this made headlines at the time. And keeping this in mind, should Europe be surprised with last week's events in Ceuta?
Well, that depends if we blame the Spanish government for these events or somebody else. Of course, the wider context has seen Spain already in some kind of, let's say, ambivalent light, as you described, seen from the other member states' perspective, that the readiness to grant legalization, technically, to illegal immigrants who then would have access to the entire Schengen area, of course, has been received with some mixed feelings. It's a difficult question because we still don't know who's really, at least officially, responsible for what happened recently in Ceuta and also Melilla, whether it's Moroccan side is to be blamed or whether the Spanish side has made mistakes of diplomatic nature or technical nature. This is still very open. But of course, the general context, the atmosphere, let's say, wasn't good before and has not improved now, as we've seen from reactions not only by Giorgia Meloni, but several other heads of government in the EU, who maybe in still couched words, but who are now very concerned that the Spanish, as it seems, leniency or incapability to master such a situation easily could open the gates to future similar events. And it's nothing that hasn't happened before. We've seen similar events in the past in that same area, in the Ceuta and Melilla exclaves. We've seen similar things from the Turkish side. So in the end, it's about the question about that the European Union cannot maintain its external border without the cooperation of neighboring countries, but this cooperation is often embedded in very ambivalent conditions.
Now, do you think that Pedro Sanchez and his government actually need to revisit their migration policies? Because without a doubt, the migration policies in and of themselves aren't helping the situation.
Yes, fundamentally, yes, but independently from this most recent incident here in Ceuta. I mean, the criticism has been there before. The way how illegal immigrants are dealt with in general, we've seen this from the Canary Islands last year already, or beginning of this year, when also from Morocco mostly, illegal migrants made it to these islands and were brought to mainland Spain. And there's the fear, of course, in the other EU member states, in some of them at least, that something else, a similar procedure might be introduced more or less openly for people arriving in Ceuta, although the Spanish government analyzes this is not Schengen territory and different rules apply, this is true. But in the end, this is all politics. So and we have heard statements from members of Pedro Sanchez's own government, which is a very left-leaning government. So wherever you stand, that's very obvious. Who say they're very open for this kind of very generous immigration policy. And so this is a general problem independently from the Ceuta situation. And here I do not see, listening to the statement by Pedro Sanchez just after the Ceuta incident, where he speaks of being mild and generous and so on, that I don't see any change happening here on the Spanish side.
And now, perhaps a very basic question, but one that many people are asking themselves. What made 60,000 people decide to collectively swim across to Ceuta?
Yes, this is a very interesting question. If it wasn't for the tragedy of 70 people or so having drowned or died in other ways, I don't know exactly, that would look almost funny, right? Like how this is possible. It has also been mentioned that how could the Moroccan authorities not realize that and not see it? Of course, they've seen it. I mean, I would not go as far as saying they orchestrated this, although some people are saying that, but they tolerated it. Who organized this, who called these people up, so to say, who maybe gave them instructions, or if that is the case. We don't know, and I don't want to speculate here. Now, of course, everybody's speculating, but I want to go into this. But it's hardly imaginable that this could really be a spontaneous action of any sorts. I mean, it's always the wider context that, let's say, if Morocco is involved, which I assume to some degree it is, it's been interpreted as a demonstration of power, of the fact that Morocco, and this is also true for countries like Turkey and others, they could, if they wanted to, put pressure on the EU on its external border in order for some to get some political bargain or whatever it may be. But it means that the EU, this mighty bloc, on certain issues is very, very weak and helpless and can be blackmailed. And I think this is the major concern that we have to face.
Now, we've spoken a little bit about Spain's migration policies. Obviously, there are some other bigger factors at play. But the next question is, why should the rest of the EU pay the price for these kind of events?
Yeah, I don't think it should. I mean, the problem is that we have now had this so-called migration crisis going on for some 11 years, if we count from 2015, the opening of borders, or non-closing of borders to Syrian refugees, or so-called Syrian refugees, notably driven by Germany at the time, but it's not only Germany. We have now, just in June, we have the implementation of the CEAS, the Common European Asylum System, as a, let's say, fortification of the existing common asylum and migration policy that's been around since 1993, the moment the EU was founded. But in the last 10 years, it's become a really urgent matter, but took them another decade to come up with this kind of system. Now, it was just 6 weeks ago came into force. It's too early to tell how well it could be working. It has been this event has now been called the first stress test of this situation, of this new system, possibly. It was a deliberate attempt to see how the EU reacts after this apparently new policy. But it's the same problem with all EU policies that look nice on paper, but the implementation is often a problem. And the older, let's say, differences and contradictions among the EU member states on how this whole phenomenon of migration should be treated or managed, that hasn't changed much. All the promises written into the new system, CEAS, might bring an improvement, better coordination, easier decision-making, and so on. But this is all very much theory, and this has been discussed in very much the same way for a decade at least. So we still have to wait for actual effects of that new policy, if it's new policy. Because, the key problem is to maintain the Schengen area, or better, the so-called area of freedom, security, and justice, and lift the internal borders. We need a strong, fortified external border, and the EU has not been ready or able to guarantee this. And this is the root problem of it all.
Well, Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni was very clear, and she was very quick in her response. She suggested suspending the EU's border-free Schengen arrangement with Spain. This was supported by Finland and Denmark. At the moment, we're looking at a 1-month suspension of the Schengen agreement with Spain. What do you think of this move? Obviously, Spain disagrees with this, feels that it's unfair.
Yes, I'm not even sure if it's legally possible. I'm not exactly an expert on these details, but of course it's a more symbolic move. I mean, you have Schengen, you don't have it. We have seen, of course, we have had border controls in Germany, Denmark, other countries for over a year now. So, of course, many member states have taken particular steps to, let's say, modify the Schengen policy in real life. So Italy can do this, Finland can do this, but it will not change the overall landscape and the fundamental problem, how to, sorry for the repetition, how to keep this area of freedom, security and justice going while being fair to everybody, which is very difficult. Access to the EU, this is the key thing. Who should have access to the EU under what conditions? This whole concept was drafted in the 1990s for a time when this kind of migration pressure was still unimaginable. This has fundamentally changed. The whole policy has been would need to be changed, but it doesn't happen because the EU, which I find very likable, wants to maintain its proclaimed image of being a friendly area, that it's treating people well, and that's certainly something we all support. But the practical implementation of that requires, unfortunately, in certain situations, hard decisions. And for example, Frontex, to mention the Warsaw-based border guarding agency of the European Union, as we know, is not only having shortages of material kind, but especially is not being given all the information about illegal migrants by the member states that it would need to effectively execute its function. And all this speaks of the fact that the EU member states themselves don't really know what they want in this point, that they're overwhelmed by this geopolitical challenge. They still haven't lived up to being, if you want, asked for place to go to, which may sound nice, but also requires, of course, a really rational and effective management of the external border, and we don't have it.
Just very briefly, we have this emergency meeting coming up tomorrow. What do you think is the absolute priority, keeping in mind that in our part of the world, the main concern is the weaponization of migration?
Yes, I mean, of course, this will be underlined again. The other thing will be underlined, I'm sorry, and rightly so, is the necessary unity of European Union. So I'm not in favor of, let's say, glossing over existing differences and saying everything is fine, because it's visibly not the case. Of course, we need to maintain a common policy here. If really the 27 must do what they want, that will lead to nowhere. But it's the problem is always this unity and solidarity, what it means, these nice words, and not excluding anyone. I'm afraid this will be another declaration without any action following up.
Jens Boysen, Associate Professor at Civitas University, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
And that's all for World Talks. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for more on TVP World. Goodbye.